I never thought a mailbox could change my life, but that's exactly what happened when I painted mine purple. The fine came in the morning mail, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association logo stamped in the corner, a ridiculous silhouette of an oak tree that looked more like a mushroom cloud. I stared at the notice in disbelief. $500 for unauthorized aesthetic alterations to community-approved mail receptacles. $500 for a can of purple paint that cost me $20 at Home Depot. My name is Xavier Edwards, but everyone calls me X. I moved to Oakridge Estates in Fairfield, Connecticut, 6 months ago after landing a job at a software development company in Stamford. I bought the modest 2-story colonial at the entrance of Maple Lane because it was within my budget and close enough to work that I could avoid the worst of the commuter traffic. What I didn't realize was that I was also buying into a dictatorship disguised as a neighborhood association. I crumpled the notice in my hand and marched across my front lawn, past the mailbox in question, a standard metal box mounted on a wooden post that I'd painted a vibrant shade of purple last weekend. It wasn't neon or offensive. It was a deep, rich purple that reminded me of twilight. I thought it added character to my otherwise ordinary house. My destination was 3 doors down, the home of Patricia Whitfield, current president of the Oakridge Estates HOA. Everyone called her Patty, but never to her face. She insisted on Patricia, just like she insisted on every other ridiculous rule in the 50-page HOA covenant that I admittedly hadn't read before signing the closing papers. I knocked on Patricia's pristine white door, its brass knocker gleaming in the morning sun. The door swung open to reveal Patricia herself, immaculately dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the breast pocket. Her blonde hair was styled in what I'd come to recognize as the official "I want to speak to the manager" haircut. "Xavier," she said, her lips pressed into a thin line, "I assume this is about the notice. $500 for painting my mailbox." I held up the crumpled paper. "That's insane, Patricia." "It's outlined clearly in the covenant, Section 12, Paragraph 3. All exterior fixtures, including mailboxes, must conform to the approved color palette." She recited it like scripture. "Purple is not on the approved palette. It's a mailbox, not a billboard for adult entertainment," I said. "Nobody cares except you." Her eyes narrowed. "The rules exist for a reason. Property values, community standards. I understand community standards, but this fine is excessive." The board voted unanimously. She folded her arms across her chest. "You have 14 days to pay the fine and return the mailbox to an approved color, or we'll begin adding late fees." I took a deep breath. "Can I appeal?" "The next board meeting is in 2 weeks. You're welcome to present your case, but I wouldn't get my hopes up." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The rules are the rules, Xavier." As I walked back to my house, I noticed my neighbor Vanessa Lopez watering her garden. Vanessa was one of the few friendly faces I'd encountered since moving in. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore denim overalls splattered with paint. Unlike most of the neighborhood, Vanessa's yard was a riot of color and creativity, with whimsical garden sculptures and a variety of flowers that definitely weren't on any approved plant list. "Let me guess," she called out. "Patricia's on the warpath about your mailbox." I held up the fine notice. $500, Vanessa whistled. "That's steep, even for the Queen of Oakridge." "How does she get away with this?" I asked. "Most people just give in," Vanessa explained, turning off her hose. "It's easier than fighting. A few years ago, Jim Caldwell down on Oak Drive tried to install solar panels. The HOA made his life hell for months until he finally caved. That doesn't seem right, Vanessa shrugged. It's not, but Patricia has been running this place like her personal fiefdom for almost a decade. Her husband's a lawyer, so the HOA always has legal muscle to flex. I looked back at my purple mailbox, standing proudly at the edge of my property. I really like that color. It's a nice color, Vanessa agreed. But is it worth the fight? I wasn't sure. As a software engineer, I was used to solving problems logically. The logical solution here was probably to repaint the mailbox and pay the fine. But something about Patricia's smug certainty made me want to resist. I think I need to read that covenant more carefully, I said. Vanessa gave me a knowing smile. If you're looking for loopholes, you might want to talk to Marcus Green. He's been here since the neighborhood was built. Lives in that big gray house at the end of the cul-de-sac. I thanked Vanessa and headed back inside, determined to fight this absurd fine. What I didn't know then was that my little purple mailbox rebellion would uncover secrets about Oakridge Estates that would turn the entire neighborhood upside down. That evening, I dug through my closing documents until I found the HOA covenant. It was exactly as boring and restrictive as I feared. 52 pages of rules governing everything from grass height, not to exceed 3.5 inches, to holiday decorations, which could be displayed no earlier than 30 days before the holiday and must be removed within 5 days after. Section 12. Paragraph 3 did indeed specify that mailboxes must conform to the approved color palette, which was limited to white, black, beige, or forest green. The violation fee schedule listed unapproved color alterations as subject to a $100 fine, not $500. Armed with this discrepancy, I decided to visit Marcus Green the next day. Marcus's house was larger than most in the neighborhood, set back from the street with mature oak trees shading the expansive lawn. Unlike the other houses with their cookie-cutter appearances, Marcus's home had character stone pathways, a wrap-around porch, and subtle but distinctive architectural details. I rang the doorbell and waited. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a tall man in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm Xavier Edwards. I moved in a few months ago, down at the entrance to Maple Lane." "Ah, the purple mailbox." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "News travels fast in Oakridge. Vanessa Lopez suggested I talk to you. I got hit with a fine and I'm looking for some perspective." Marcus stepped aside. "Come on in. I've been watching Patricia's reign of terror for years. About time someone stood up to her." Inside, Marcus's home was filled with books and maps. He led me to a study where blueprints and old documents covered a large table. "I'm something of a local historian," he explained, noticing my interest. "I've been documenting the development of this area since I moved here in 1982. That's before Oakridge was built, wasn't it? Indeed. This was all farmland back then. I bought 10 acres and built my house before the developers came through." He gestured for me to sit. "Now, tell me about your mailbox situation." I explained about the fine and showed him the discrepancy in the fee schedule. "That's typical Patricia," Marcus said, shaking his head. "She inflates fines regularly, counting on no one checking the actual rules." "Can she do that?" "No, but most people just pay rather than confront her." Marcus leaned forward. "But there's something more interesting about your particular situation. Your house is at the entrance to Maple Lane, correct?" I nodded. "And your mailbox sits at the corner where Maple meets Oakridge Drive." "That's right." Marcus shuffled through some papers and pulled out an old survey map. "This might interest you. When the developers built Oakridge, They had to negotiate with several property owners, including me. I sold them most of my land but kept my house and the surrounding acre. He pointed to a section of the map. The original plans for the neighborhood had Maple Lane configured differently. There was a dispute with another landowner, and they had to redraw the boundaries. In the shuffle, a small strip of land at the entrance to Maple Lane was never properly incorporated into the development. I leaned closer to see where he was pointing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Marcus said with a twinkle in his eye, "that there's a good chance the land where your mailbox sits and possibly the entire street frontage isn't actually part of Oakridge Estates at all. It might still be registered under the original farm parcel." My heart raced. "How can I find out for sure?" "You'd need to check the county property records. If I'm right, Patricia has no authority to fine you for that mailbox because it's not on HOA property." I left Marcus's house with a mission. The next day was Saturday, giving me the perfect opportunity to visit the county recorder's office. The building was an imposing brick structure in downtown Fairfield, with the sterile, fluorescent-lit atmosphere common to government facilities. A bored-looking clerk directed me to a computer terminal where I could search property records. It took me nearly 2 hours of digging through digital archives, but what I found made my jaw drop. The strip of land at the entrance to Maple Lane, approximately 10 feet wide and running the length of the street, had indeed never been incorporated into Oakridge Estates. According to the records, it was still part of the original Maple Hill farm parcel, which had been foreclosed upon in 1996 and acquired by the bank. The bank had apparently forgotten about this small strip when selling the larger parcels to developers, and it had sat in limbo for nearly 30 years. Even more incredibly, I discovered that the county had auctioned off the forgotten parcel for unpaid taxes 5 years ago. The winning bidder, for the princely sum of $842, was listed as X Properties LLC. I frowned at the screen. X Properties? I'd never heard of it. But something tugged at my memory. Quickly, I searched the business registry and found that X Properties LLC was registered to one Xavier Edwards. My mind reeled. I'd never formed an LLC, never bid on property at a tax auction. How was this possible? And then it hit me. My uncle Xavier, my namesake, had passed away 6 years ago. Uncle X had been a real estate investor, always looking for obscure opportunities. He must have formed the LLC in my name and bought the parcel as some sort of gift or investment, but he died before telling me about it. I printed out all the relevant documents, my hands shaking with excitement. If these records were accurate, I didn't just own the land where my mailbox stood, I owned the entire entrance to Maple Lane, a strip of land that the HOA had been treating as their own for years. Armed with this explosive information, I had a decision to make. I could simply use it to fight the mailbox fine, or I could do something much more dramatic. I chose drama. Monday morning, I took the day off work and hired a surveyor to officially mark the boundaries of my newly discovered property. By noon, small yellow flags lined both sides of the entrance to Maple Lane, extending about 10 feet in from the main road. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. By the time I finished placing a private property sign next to my purple mailbox, Patricia Whitfield was storming across the street, her face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing at the flags and sign. I handed her a folder containing copies of the property records. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding about the fine, Patricia. My mailbox isn't subject to HOA rules because it isn't on HOA property." "In fact," I said, enjoying the moment perhaps more than I should have, "this entire strip of land belongs to me." Patricia snatched the folder and rifled through the documents, her expression shifting from anger to disbelief. "This is preposterous," she sputtered. "This land is part of Oakridge Estates. It's maintained by our landscaping service." "That was a generous contribution on your part," I said, "maintaining my property for free all these years. But now that I'm aware of the situation, I'll take responsibility for it." "You can't just claim ownership of community property." "It was never community property, Patricia. The records are clear." I pointed to the survey flags. "Everything between those markers belongs to me, not the HOA." By now, several neighbors had gathered to watch the confrontation. I recognized Jim Caldwell, the solar panel guy Vanessa had mentioned, among them. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about this. The HOA has lawyers, Mr. Edwards." "So do I bluffed, hoping she couldn't see my knees shaking. "And mine have property records on their side." She turned on her heel and marched back to her house, clutching the folder of documents. The neighbors lingered, murmuring among themselves. Jim Caldwell approached me with an appreciative grin. Whatever happens next, that was worth watching just to see Patricia speechless. Nobody stood up to her like that in years. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. "I just don't think it's right to fine people arbitrarily." "Oh, she's been doing more than that," Jim said. "Last year, she pushed through a special assessment for community enhancements that cost each household $2,000. Most of the money went to redesigning the entrance, which apparently you own." I looked at the elaborate stone sign marking the entrance to Oakridge Estates, the professionally landscaped flower beds surrounding it, and the decorative lampposts that lined both sides of Maple Lane. All of it sitting on my property. "I had no idea," I said. Jim patted me on the shoulder. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, my friend. Patricia won't let this go easily." He was right. That evening, I received an email from the HOA board requesting my presence at an emergency meeting the following night. The email was polite but firm, emphasizing the urgent community matter requiring immediate resolution. I forwarded the email to a lawyer friend from college, asking for advice. His response was quick. "Interesting situation. Don't agree to anything. Record everything. I'll look over those documents for you." The emergency meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building next to the neighborhood pool. By the time I arrived, the room was packed with residents, buzzing with speculation. Patricia sat at a table at the front, flanked by 4 other board members. Her husband, Richard Whitfield, stood off to the side, his expensive suit and severe expression screaming attorney. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice artificially calm. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We're facing an unusual situation that affects our community." She gestured toward me. "Mr. Edwards claims to own the entrance to Maple Lane based on some historical property records." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The board is investigating these claims," Patricia continued. "In the meantime, we ask everyone to remain calm and avoid escalating the situation." Richard Whitfield stepped forward. "As counsel for the HOA, I've conducted a preliminary review of Mr. Edwards' documentation. While there appears to be a clerical error in the property records, we believe the land in question was implicitly incorporated into the development through years of established use." I stood up. "That's not how property law works. Adverse possession requires at least 15 years in Connecticut, and the original owner would have needed notice. Neither condition applies here." Richard looked surprised, clearly not expecting me to know legal terminology. "Furthermore," I continued, "the HOA has been imposing rules and collecting fines related to property it doesn't own. That might constitute fraud." The room erupted in conversation. I noticed several residents nodding in agreement. Patricia banged a gavel. This meeting will remain orderly. Mr. Edwards, what exactly are you hoping to achieve with these claims? I had been thinking about this question since discovering my ownership. What did I want? Revenge, power, money. I want 3 things, I said. First, I want the fine for my mailbox rescinded since you have no authority over it. Second, I want an audit of all fines collected for violations related to property on my land. And third, I want a review of the HOA's governance procedures because it seems like the current board isn't following its own rules. More murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Patricia's smile was ice cold. We'll take your requests under advisement. Until this matter is resolved, the board will suspend enforcement actions related to the disputed area. I sat down, heart pounding. I'd stood my ground, but this was clearly just the beginning. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to express their support. Many had their own stories of Patricia's overreach, excessive fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, personal vendettas thinly disguised as covenant violations. Vanessa Lopez joined me as I walked home. That was impressive, X. You really threw down the gauntlet. I'm not sure what I've gotten myself into, I admitted. A revolution by the looks of it. She nudged my arm. Patricia's been abusing her power for years. It's about time someone challenged her. I just wanted to keep my purple mailbox. Vanessa laughed. Well, now you own the street it sits on. Talk about escalation. Over the next few days, tensions in Oakridge Estates escalated. Patricia and the board hired a different surveyor to contest my property claims, but their findings only confirmed what I already knew. The strip of land was indeed mine, legally and unambiguously. Unable to fight the property records, Patricia changed tactics. A letter arrived from the HOA's attorney claiming that when I purchased my house, I implicitly agreed to incorporate all adjacent property into the HOA's jurisdiction. It was a desperate stretch, legally speaking, but it showed they weren't giving up. Meanwhile, I became something of a neighborhood celebrity. People I'd never spoken to stopped by to offer support or share their own HOA horror stories. Jim Caldwell organized an informal gathering at his house where residents discussed ways to reform the HOA's governance. The seeds of rebellion were sprouting. One evening, as I was painting a second coat on my now famous purple mailbox, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. A woman I didn't recognize stepped out elegantly dressed, with short silver hair and a confident bearing. "Xavier Edwards?" she asked, approaching my driveway. "That's me. Victoria Lawson." She extended her hand. "I'm a real estate attorney. I heard about your situation from Marcus Green, and I'd like to offer my services." I shook her hand, surprised. "That's generous, but I'm not sure I can afford a real estate attorney right now." Victoria smiled. "Consider it pro bono, at least for the consultation." I've had my own run-ins with overzealous HOAs, and I find this particular case fascinating. I invited her inside, and we spent the next hour reviewing the property documents and the HOA's response. Victoria confirmed what I suspected: their legal position was weak. "They're hoping to intimidate you," she explained. "HOAs rely on the fact that most homeowners don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back." "So what should I do?" Victoria leaned back in her chair. "You have leverage here, Xavier, significant leverage. The HOA has been making decisions about property they don't own, possibly collecting money for improvements to that property. At minimum, that's misrepresentation. Could I sue them? You could, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming." She tapped the property records thoughtfully. There might be a more elegant solution. Tell me, what do you really want out of this? I considered the question carefully. I want the HOA to be fair. No more arbitrary rules, no more excessive fines. I want residents to have more say in how the neighborhood is governed. Victoria nodded. Noble goals. I think we can work with that. With Victoria's help, I drafted a proposal to the HOA board. In exchange for formally granting an easement for community use of my property, I wanted several concessions. A complete overhaul of the HOA governance structure, including term limits for board members, a transparent financial review of all HOA expenditures for the past 5 years, and a revision of the covenant to eliminate arbitrary restrictions. The response was swift and predictable. Patricia Whitfield called another emergency meeting, this time framing me as an extortionist threatening the community. But the mood in the room had shifted. Many residents were now openly questioning the board's actions, especially after learning about the financial implications of the property dispute. If Mr. Edwards owns the entrance, does that mean our special assessment for landscaping that area was misappropriated? Asked a resident named Karen Mitchell, ironically using the "I want to speak to the manager" tone against Patricia herself. Patricia struggled to maintain control of the meeting as more residents voiced concerns. The board's unity began to crack, with 2 members openly questioning Patricia's handling of the situation. After the meeting, Richard Whitfield approached me in the parking lot, away from prying eyes. "You're making a mistake, Edwards," he said, his voice low. "Patricia has built this community from nothing. Everything she's done has been to maintain property values and community standards. By charging arbitrary fines and enforcing rules selectively," I countered. Richard's expression hardened. "You think you've won because you found a loophole in some old property records, but this isn't over." His threat hung in the air as he walked away. I tried to dismiss it as bluster, but something in his tone left me uneasy. The next morning, I woke to find my purple mailbox gone, not just repainted, but completely removed, post and all. In its place was a hole in the ground and a set of tire tracks across my lawn. I called the police immediately to report the vandalism. Officer Jenkins arrived within 20 minutes, a middle-aged cop with a seen-it-all expression. "Mailbox theft, huh?" he said, surveying the damage. "That's actually a federal offense since mailboxes are technically postal property." I explained the ongoing HOA dispute, trying not to sound like a conspiracy theorist when suggesting who might be responsible. Officer Jenkins took notes. "Neighborhood disputes can get ugly. We'll look into it, but without witnesses or cameras, it'll be tough to prove who did this." As he was leaving, Vanessa approached from across the street. "I saw something last night," she told us. "Around 2 a.m., a pickup truck pulled up. 2 men got out and dug up the mailbox. They loaded it into the truck and drove off." Officer Jenkins perked up. "Could you identify the men or the vehicle?" It was dark, but the truck had a company logo on the side, Whitfield Landscaping. My jaw dropped. Whitfield Landscaping was owned by Patricia's son, Thomas. The officer raised his eyebrows. "That's helpful information. I'll follow up on this." By afternoon, the story of my stolen mailbox had spread throughout Oakridge Estates. Several neighbors stopped by to express their outrage, including Jim Caldwell, who brought me a temporary mailbox to install. "This is crossing a line," Jim said as we dug a hole for the new post. "Stealing a mailbox is petty and illegal." "It's intimidation," I agreed. "They want me to back down." "So what are you going to do?" I secured the new mailbox, a standard black one from the hardware store, and stepped back to examine our work. "I'm going to do what they least expect. I'm going to be reasonable." That evening, I emailed the HOA board with a modified proposal. I would grant an easement for the community to use my property without demanding the complete overhaul of the HOA structure. Instead, I requested only 3 things: a refund of any fines related to property on my land, a commitment to follow the HOA's own rules regarding fees, and the resignation of any board member found to have been involved in the mailbox theft. The email was deliberately measured and conciliatory. Victoria had advised me that appearing reasonable would put more pressure on the board than making extreme demands. "Give them a face-saving way to resolve this," she'd said. 2 days later, Officer Jenkins called to inform me that the stolen mailbox had been recovered from the Whitfield landscaping facility. Thomas Whitfield claimed it had been a misunderstanding. He thought he was removing an unauthorized fixture, as directed by the HOA board. The police weren't buying the explanation, but without proof that Thomas knew he was stealing rather than enforcing HOA rules, they couldn't make charges stick. However, the discovery put immense pressure on Patricia. The day after the police visit to Whitfield Landscaping, she requested a private meeting with me. We met at a coffee shop in town, neutral territory away from the watchful eyes of neighbors. Patricia looked tired, the carefully maintained facade of control beginning to crack. "Your proposal is unacceptable," she began, stirring her untouched coffee. "But I recognize that we need to find a resolution. I'm listening. The board is willing to rescind the mailbox fine and acknowledge your property rights. In exchange, you grant a permanent easement for community use and agree not to interfere with HOA operations." I sipped my coffee. "What about accountability for the stolen mailbox?" Patricia's expression tightened. "That was an unfortunate misunderstanding." Thomas was acting on what he believed were legitimate instructions. From whom? She didn't answer directly. "The point is, we want to move forward constructively." "So do I said, "but moving forward means acknowledging what went wrong. The HOA has been operating beyond its authority, imposing arbitrary fines, and now apparently authorizing the removal of private property. That needs to change." "You've been in Oakridge for 6 months, Patricia said, an edge creeping into her voice. "I've dedicated 10 years to this community. Everything I've done has been to protect our neighborhood and property values." "I believe you think that's true," I replied. "But the methods matter, Patricia. Rules should be fair and applied consistently. The board should be accountable to residents. What exactly do you want?" I laid out my terms. A reasonable easement agreement that acknowledged my ownership while ensuring community access. A commitment to follow the HOA's published rules and fee schedule. And a mechanism for greater resident input in HOA decisions. "And I want an apology for the mailbox," I added. Public acknowledgement that it was inappropriately removed. Patricia looked like she'd rather eat glass than apologize, but she nodded stiffly. "I'll present your terms to the board." As our meeting concluded, she hesitated before leaving. "You should know that Richard and I are selling our house." After this situation, I no longer feel I can effectively lead the community. I was stunned. "That wasn't my intention to force you out. It's been coming for a while," she admitted. "The neighborhood is changing. Perhaps its leadership should too." With that surprising confession, she left, leaving me to wonder if I'd misjudged her. The following week brought a flurry of developments. The HOA board accepted most of my terms, agreeing to a formal easement agreement that would be added to the property records. They issued a public statement acknowledging the inappropriate removal of my mailbox, carefully worded to avoid direct admission of theft. Patricia resigned from the board, effective immediately. 2 other board members followed suit, creating an unexpected leadership vacuum in the HOA. An interim board was formed, with Jim Caldwell serving as temporary president. The first order of business was scheduling an open election for permanent board positions, with new bylaws ensuring term limits and transparent decision-making. As for my mailbox, I received an unexpected delivery, a custom-made purple mailbox, more beautiful than my amateur paint job, with a note. From your neighbors on Maple Lane. Thanks for standing up for all of us. I installed it immediately, this time adding a small solar light to illuminate it at night. It became something of a landmark, with residents joking that you could give directions to Oakridge Estates by saying, "Turn at the purple mailbox." 3 months after the initial fine, the transformation of Oakridge Estates was remarkable. The new HOA board, elected with record resident participation, implemented a revised covenant that maintained necessary community standards while eliminating arbitrary restrictions. All fines were standardized and published, with a clear appeals process. The easement for my strip of land was formalized, with provisions requiring board consultation before any changes to the entrance area. In a gesture of goodwill, I contributed to a community fund for maintaining the entrance landscaping. One evening, as I was enjoying a beer on my front porch, Vanessa Lopez stopped by with a housewarming gift belatedly. She joked. "A plant for your garden," she said, handing me a small potted purple flowering bush, "to match your famous mailbox." "Thanks, though I'm trying to live down my reputation as the neighborhood rabble-rouser," Vanessa laughed. "Are you kidding? You're a local hero." People in other HOA communities are talking about pulling an Edwards when they stand up to unreasonable boards. I groaned. "That's not the legacy I was hoping for when I moved here." "Own it," she advised, sitting beside me on the porch step. "You change things for the better." Not many people can say that. She was right, in a way. What had started as a simple act of self-expression, painting my mailbox purple, had uncovered deeper issues about governance, property rights, and community standards. By standing up for my ridiculous mailbox, I'd inadvertently become an advocate for fair treatment and transparency. Patricia and Richard Whitfield sold their house quickly and moved to a gated community in Florida. Thomas Whitfield's landscaping company no longer held the contract for Oakridge Estates, replaced by a service that charged considerably less for the same work. Marcus Green, whose historical knowledge had set everything in motion, became a regular visitor, sharing stories about the neighborhood's past and offering guidance to the new board about preserving the community's character while embracing necessary change. As for me, I eventually agreed to serve on the Architectural Review Committee, a position I accepted with no small amount of irony. My first official act was to propose an expanded color palette for exterior fixtures, including mailboxes. The proposal passed unanimously. A year after the purple mailbox incident, Oakridge Estates held a community picnic in the park at the center of the neighborhood. Residents who had barely known each other's names now mingled freely, sharing food and conversation. Children played on the recently upgraded playground equipment, funded by money saved through more efficient HOA management. Jim Caldwell, now officially elected as HOA president, raised a toast to the community. To Oakridge Estates, where even the mailboxes express individuality. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. As I looked around at my neighbors, not just residents sharing geography, but people forming genuine connections, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't expected when I first moved here. Vanessa sidled up beside me, now more than just a neighbor. Our friendship had blossomed into something more over the months of community activism. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't painted that mailbox. She smiled. Or if your uncle hadn't mysteriously bought that strip of land and put it in your name. That remained the one unsolved mystery in the whole affair. Why had Uncle X purchased that specific parcel? Was it random chance, or had he somehow known it might be valuable one day? I'd searched through his papers, consulted with his former business partners, but found no explanation. Some things were not meant to understand, Vanessa said, reading my expression. Maybe it was just luck, very specific luck, the best kind. She took my hand. Come on, they're about to start the neighborhood photo. We need the purple mailbox owner front and center. As we walked toward the gathered residents, I reflected on how a simple act of self-expression had cascaded into community transformation. My purple mailbox had been a small rebellion against conformity, but it had revealed something important. Communities thrive not through rigid enforcement of rules, but through respect for individual expression balanced with collective responsibility. Oakridge Estates wasn't perfect, no community is, but it had become a place where people cared about their impact on each other, where governance served the residents rather than controlling them, and where even a purple mailbox could be celebrated as part of what made our neighborhood unique. And sometimes, that's all anyone really wants. The freedom to paint their mailbox purple without fear of retribution, and neighbors who might shake their heads but ultimately accept that diversity makes a community stronger. As Jim called everyone together for the photo, positioning us in front of the newly designed neighborhood sign, which, by community vote, now incorporated a subtle purple accent, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. I'd moved to Oakridge Estates seeking nothing more than a convenient place to live while I focused on my career. Instead, I'd found a cause, a community and connections that had enriched my life in ways I never expected. "Everyone say purple," called the photographer. "Purple." The residents of Oakridge Estates cheered in unison, none louder than me. The following spring, something remarkable happened in Oakridge Estates. Colorful mailboxes began appearing throughout the neighborhood: deep blue on Elm Street, cherry red on Oak Drive, a striking teal on Willow Way. The Architectural Review Committee, under my guidance, had approved each one, celebrating the unique character they brought to our streets. Patricia Whitfield would have had a conniption, but Patricia was gone, along with her rigid vision of community standards. In her place was a governance structure that balanced necessary consistency with room for personal expression. One Saturday morning, as I was installing a new garden path inspired by Marcus Green's stone walkways, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. A man in his 60s stepped out, looking vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place him. "Xavier Edwards," he called, approaching with an outstretched hand. "Roger Blackstone, I was your uncle's attorney." I set down my tools and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. What brings you here?" "I've been meaning to visit for some time," he explained. "When Xavier, your uncle, passed, there were certain matters he asked me to follow up on after a specific period. One of those involves this property." My curiosity piqued. "You mean my house?" "No, the other property." He gestured toward the street. "The easement land." We sat on my front porch while Roger explained. Uncle X had indeed purchased the strip of land deliberately after researching property records in several developing subdivisions around Connecticut. "Your uncle had a particular interest in HOA governance," Roger said. He believed many associations abused their authority because residents lacked leverage to challenge them. "So he bought forgotten parcels of land," Roger nodded, "in several communities. He called it his HOA accountability project. The idea was to create legal challenges to overreaching associations by establishing ownership of key properties within their purview. I was stunned, and he put this one in my name because you were his namesake, and he knew you were considering a move to Connecticut eventually. He hoped you might carry on his work in some fashion. Roger pulled out an envelope from his briefcase. He left this for you to be delivered if and when you discovered the property. The envelope contained a letter written in my uncle's distinctive scrawl. Xavier, if you're reading this, you've discovered my little land parcel gift. Surprise! I hope it hasn't caused you too much trouble, or perhaps I should say, I hope it has caused exactly the right kind of trouble. HOAs serve an important purpose when run properly, but too many become fiefdoms for power-hungry individuals who use arbitrary rules to control their neighbors. I've spent years researching this phenomenon and looking for legal leverage points to restore balance. The parcel I've placed in your name is one such leverage point. Use it wisely, not for personal gain, but to ensure fairness and community input in local governance. Property rights come with responsibilities, after all. I've arranged similar situations in 3 other communities. If you're interested in continuing this work, Roger can provide the details. Whatever you decide, remember that the spaces we share should reflect all who share them, not just those who shout the loudest or clutch the rulebook most tightly. Your favorite uncle. I know I was. I read the letter twice, amazed at my uncle's foresight and slightly amused by his mischievousness. It was so like him to orchestrate a property rights challenge from beyond the grave. So there are other parcels like mine? I asked Roger. 3 that he acquired, each with strategic significance to their respective HOAs. None have been discovered yet, as far as I know. Your uncle set up monitoring systems through my office to alert us if anyone begins investigating the titles. I considered this information carefully. What was his end goal? Just to create problems for HOAs. Not problems, Roger corrected. Accountability. Xavier believed strongly that when communities govern themselves, all voices should matter, not just the loudest or most powerful. The parcels were meant to provide leverage for that accountability, should it be needed. As Roger departed, promising to send the details on the other properties, I sat on my porch contemplating my uncle's unexpected legacy. What had seemed like a random coincidence, my ownership of the entrance to Maple Lane had actually been part of a deliberate strategy to challenge unchecked HOA power. That evening, I shared the revelation with Vanessa over dinner at my place. So your uncle was basically a vigilante real estate investor, she asked, amused. I guess you could put it that way. A very patient, detail-oriented vigilante with a specific focus on HOA governance. And now he's passing the cape to you. She twirled pasta on her fork. Are you going to take up his mission? It was a question I'd been pondering all day. I'm not sure. The Oakridge situation worked out well, but deliberately stirring up HOA disputes seems potentially messy. Yet sometimes necessary, Vanessa pointed out. Look what happened here. People who never spoke to each other are now friends. The community is more engaged, more collaborative. All because someone challenged the status quo. She had a point. The transformation of Oakridge Estates had been remarkable. What had been a collection of houses governed by fear of fines was now a true community where residents participated actively in decisions. Maybe there's a middle ground, I suggested. Not actively causing problems, but being available as a resource for communities facing similar situations. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn more deeply into local governance issues. Jim Caldwell introduced me to HOA board members from neighboring developments who were interested in our reformed governance model. I shared our experience, tactfully omitting the property ownership revelation that had catalyzed the change. Roger sent the files on my uncle's other property acquisitions, and I studied them carefully. One parcel included the only access road to a small lakeside community in Massachusetts. Another encompassed a strip of beachfront that an exclusive development claimed as private. The third included the drainage system for a large subdivision near Hartford. Each represented potential leverage against HOA overreach, but also responsibility. These weren't just legal curiosities. They were properties that affected real communities and real people. After considerable thought, I decided not to actively disclose these ownership situations unless necessary. Instead, I established a small foundation, the Purple Mailbox Foundation, dedicated to promoting fair governance in community associations. The foundation offered resources, educational materials, and occasionally legal support to residents facing unreasonable HOA actions. My uncle's property acquisitions remained a tool of last resort, a fail-safe against situations where dialogue and education weren't enough to ensure fair treatment. 2 years after the Purple Mailbox incident, Oakridge Estates had become a model community, featured in regional planning publications for its collaborative governance approach. Property values had actually increased, contradicting Patricia Whitfield's dire predictions about what would happen if rules were relaxed. The entrance to Maple Lane, still technically my property but now formally shared through the easement agreement, featured a small garden maintained by a volunteer committee. The garden included flowers in every color, including a prominent section of purple blooms. Jim Caldwell completed his term as HOA president and stepped down, honoring the term limits we'd established. The transition to new leadership was smooth and democratic. As for my famous mailbox, it remained purple, though I'd upgraded to a custom design created by a local artist, featuring subtle metalwork that caught the light beautifully. It had become something of a landmark, with delivery drivers and visitors often using it as a reference point. One evening, as Vanessa and I enjoyed the sunset from my front porch, now a familiar routine in our deepening relationship, a car slowed as it passed my house. The driver rolled down his window and called out, "Is this the Purple Mailbox house?" I nodded, curious. "I'm looking at a property in Oakridge. Heard this was a good neighborhood with a reasonable HOA." He grinned. "That's hard to find these days." "Very reasonable," I confirmed. "Community-focused." He gave a thumbs up and drove on, presumably to a house showing somewhere in the neighborhood. Vanessa squeezed my hand. "Your legacy grows." "Not mine," I demurred. "It belongs to everyone who helped change things." "It started with your Purple Mailbox," she insisted. "One small act of defiance." I looked at the mailbox standing proudly at the edge of my property, our property, really, as Vanessa had gradually moved most of her things into my house over the past year. What had begun as a simple desire to add some color to my life had sparked a community transformation. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference, I acknowledged, as the sun set over Oakridge Estates, casting a purple-tinged glow across the horizon. I thought about communities everywhere struggling with the balance between individual expression and collective standards. There's no perfect solution, no one-size-fits-all approach to living together harmoniously. But perhaps the lesson of the Purple Mailbox was simply this: rules matter less than relationships. Control is less effective than cooperation. And sometimes, the most vibrant communities are those that make room for a little color outside the lines. My uncle had understood this in his way. His unconventional approach to HOA accountability had created an opportunity for positive change in Oakridge Estates. Through the Purple Mailbox Foundation, that opportunity might extend to other communities facing similar challenges. As for me, Xavier Edwards, accidental revolutionary and proud owner of a purple mailbox, I'd found something I hadn't expected when moving to a cookie-cutter subdivision: a sense of purpose, a community that mattered, and a place that truly felt like home. All because I decided my mailbox should be purple.